Psalms 128 for the Sunday school time. Someone asked me there in the back if I brought any suits for Brother Kogel. And the fact of the matter is, I think that my son John and I are wearing the same size now. And, you know, I really need my suits for going out and preaching and things like that, but he doesn't need his suits as much, so I thought I'd bring some of his and let Brother Kogel have those. You can let him know I brought some of John's for him when you see him when he gets back. Psalms 128. I'm going to read this psalm here, and then we're going to have a lesson on the home. But I believe that when you start teaching on the home, it can also be applied to the local church. Maybe if you don't have children at home, you'll still find something, a principle, in this lesson that'll still apply to you. It says here in Psalms 128, Blessed is every one that feareth the Lord, that walketh in his ways. For thou shalt eat the labor of thine hands. Happy shalt thou be, and it shall be well with thee. Thy wife shall be as a fruitful vine by the sides of thine house, thy children like olive plants round about thy table. Behold, that thus shall the man be blessed that feareth the Lord. The Lord shall bless thee out of Zion, and thou shalt see the good of Jerusalem all the days of thy life. Yea, thou shalt see thy children's children, and peace upon Israel. Now, a lot of homes don't have much peace in them. And this psalm is talking about an ideal situation where everybody's happy and there's peace, and it's a good environment, you might say. It's a healthy place to live. And a lot of families have problems. In families, there are bad attitudes. You know, you'll have somebody get a bad attitude. There's insecurities where people don't feel safe in that environment. There's stress. You know, people get under stress maybe because of their jobs or kids at school and things like that, and they can't just leave that there. They bring it home with them into the home. And there are worse things than that families are having to deal with. You know, we've had people on our street. There's people that live on our street, not saved people. They've had some really hard things happen maybe in some of their children's lives. And you become aware of that. You try to be a help to them as a Christian. Offer them what you can. Invite them to come out to a church service where maybe they would get some healing for the emotional things that they're having to deal with, and try and encourage them to seek God. But they are dealing with a lot of hard things. Now, then the lesson, I want to title this lesson, How to Have Peace at Home. And there are some principles that would help us. The Bible will help us to have peace in our homes, and really we should want to have a peace in our life and in our churches, okay? So I think that there's some things here that we can apply beyond just the home. The first thing is you've got to fear God. You know, sometimes you just have to state the obvious things, but again in verse number 1, he said, Blessed is every one that feareth the Lord, that walketh in his ways. If you want to be blessed, to have the good favor of God, to have some happiness, then fear him. He said, if you will fear the Lord, you'll be blessed. In verse number 4, it said again, Behold, that thus shall the man be blessed that feareth the Lord. This short psalm, it emphasizes that there's a blessing in fearing God. If you'll fear God, that's the first step on the road to having some peace in your life and in your home. The Bible kind of helps us to know what we're talking about when we're talking about the fear of the Lord. If you'll hold your place there in Psalms, look over in the book of Proverbs, chapter number 8. Turn over there to Proverbs, chapter number 8. And verse number 13. Proverbs 8 and verse number 13. It says here that the fear of the Lord is to hate evil. There's a very simple definition for us. The Bible gives us, Proverbs 8:13. The fear of the Lord is to hate evil. He continues, Pride and arrogancy and the evil way, and the froward mouth do I hate. You know what you need to hate? You need to hate the evil in your own life. Now, I'll tell you, I'm guilty, and I'm sure you are too. You'll read verses in the Bible and think, yeah, that's like that guy up the street. Oh, yeah, that describes this person I know at work. And yeah, this describes our government. And this describes the course our country's on. But a lot of times we don't want to apply it to us. When he said the fear of the Lord, it's not about what everybody in society is doing. It's about hating the evil that you have in your own life. That's what the fear of the Lord is all about. You will be a happier person, be a blessed person, if you would start getting upset about your own sin. That's what each one of us needs to do, is be upset about where we personally are falling short with God, and He's told us to do something about it. That's what the fear of the Lord is really about. If you love God and want to please God, and you really desire peace, then you'll have to fear Him. He's a faithful and a true God. Look in Proverbs 16. Proverbs 16 and verse number 6. Proverbs 16 and verse number 6. He said, "Here by mercy and truth iniquity is purged, and by the fear of the Lord men depart from evil." Now, these two things go together in this verse because of the way that they're linked with a colon. He's saying mercy. We know that God's the one that has to give us mercy. And he's talking about truth, and we know that God is the source of truth. You want truth, you're going to have to get it from God. You won't get it from any other source in this world. He said mercy and truth, it's by those things that iniquity, that sin is going to get purged. You're going to get it cleaned up. You're going to get rid of it. And then it's linked with, by the fear of the Lord, men depart from evil. You say, how is a person going to depart from evil? Well, they're going to have to fear God. If you don't fear God, you're just going to continue on the way that you're going. You'll never get peace that way. The fear of the Lord will get you out of sin. You know what? There's some people in the Bible that didn't fear God. You say, how do you know that? Well, they didn't depart from evil. I think about a fellow like Achan. Achan didn't fear God. He looked around. Nobody saw what he did when he took that gold and he took that Babylonian garment. He took those things. He's going to hide it in his tent. Nobody's ever going to know about that. And you know what it said? It said he troubled his own house. Now, he troubled all of Israel, but he troubled his own house. He troubled his own life. And holding on to evil will trouble your life. You'll not have peace that way. You're going to have to fear God, and that'll keep you doing what's right. The fear of the Lord will keep you out of trouble. He said that's how people depart from evil. Now back in Psalms 128, we know we got to fear God if you want to have peace in your home. But a second thing, look at verse number 3. He talks about thy wife shall be as a fruitful vine by the sides of thy house, and thy children like olive plants round about thy table. A second thing I want to point out is you can't allow filth in your home. And the examples were given as a vine that's growing by the house and some olive plants that are growing up. And you can't allow filth in your home. That's like weeds. You know, if you want to have a fruitful vine, you have to keep everything else away from it. You might have a vine, but a lot of times vines will not bring forth any kind of fruit when they're having to compete with everything else around them for nutrients out of the soil. We worked for a farmer back when I was younger, and that guy had some grapevines just for his own personal use behind his house. He liked to grow a few grapevines, just a couple rows. It was a very small thing just for him and his family. He wasn't trying to grow that to sell it like he did his corn and everything else. But he had those back there, and you know what happened though? They hardly ever took care of it. It was around the grass, so you'd always have to go out there and cut and use the weed eater around where the vines were at, but they really never did a whole lot to maintain it. And I don't ever remember there ever being grapes on those vines. What grapes it seemed like did come along, the birds came and got, but there just never seemed to be a whole lot on that vine anyway. You say, why was it? Well, it really wasn't maintained. It wasn't taken care of. And you know what? Our homes are that way. You're not going to have peace in your home if you allow everything in there to compete with what God wants to have in your home. Olive plants, they don't produce in a weed patch. I once talked to a fellow that had a good family, had children that were well ordered. He was a preacher. He said to that fellow, he said, "Sir, I've been observing your family and your home." He said, "I'm very impressed." He said, "How did you do these things? How did you get these children to behave this way? And they know these verses, and they can carry on a conversation with adults. They don't act childlike. How did you do these things?" And this man told the preacher, he said, "Well, it was the grace of God." And the preacher got thinking about that. He said, "I know that that's true. You know, when you do things and they work out, it's not because you're so smart or because you had a lot of ability. When things work out in your life, you should always give God the credit. It is the grace of God. It's the grace of God that I'm here. It's the grace of God that you're here. If you have a nice job, that's the grace of God. You don't have to have a nice job. If you have the physical abilities to drive a car and walk, and you're physically standing upright, not broke down and on your back, that was the grace of God. There's nothing special about any of us to deserve that. But the preacher thought about it. He said, well, there's more to it than that. Because if you leave raising your children to the grace of God, and that's all you ever do, you'll have a weed patch in their life. Their lives will be full of weeds. There is some stuff that you need to do too. If you just leave it all up to the grace of God and don't do anything, you're going to have a mess, because God has some expectations for you. Okay? God has some expectations. The Bible tells us there in the book of Titus that the grace of God teaches us. It teaches, what does grace do? It teaches you to live soberly and righteously. In this present world, it teaches us to live a certain way, to act a certain way. Filth comes into our homes through many avenues. It comes into people's lives through these same avenues. We used to always beat up on the TV. I got news for you. It's a lot worse than that. Now we have computers. And in fact, we have cell phones. And those things are potentially much more dangerous than a TV was ever to families, I'm afraid. I'm afraid that's very true. Worldly music, books, all the things that the world has to attract our attention away from the Lord. I'll just throw this in there because this is something that I personally don't have any interest in myself, and I see it over and over, is these fantasy-type movies. It seems like that's what Hollywood's really stuck on right now. They took the comic books from the 40s and 50s and 60s, and they want to turn all that stuff into movies now. And you know what happens when people fill their minds with that kind of stuff? They're not living in reality. Okay? It's a fantasy world of superheroes that don't really exist, with godlike abilities and powers. That's what it is. Okay? And they just get desensitized to living life. You start talking about the gospel, about Jesus raising up from the dead. Well, that's nothing. They've seen some superhero who got killed, and he's risen from the dead 8 times now. It's like you never really kill these guys. They're always coming back. And they get desensitized to the truth of God's Word. Things like that are not really good for your kids. They're not even good for you, I don't think. Things that take away your heart, your desire for God, you have to be careful of. And you say, well, that's not a problem for me. Well, then God bless you. I'm not telling you can't do it. The Bible tells us what we can and can't do. We've each got to answer to God, not one enough. But you need to be careful of some filth that would invade your home, and it will take away your peace. In the book of 2 Peter, chapter number 2, in 2 Peter 2, I'll just read it. You don't need to turn over there. But he said in verse number 7 that he delivered just Lot, who was vexed with the filthy conversation of the wicked. I want to tell you that Lot did not have a peaceful home. You know that his home didn't turn out right. When he went to go visit his sons-in-laws, they married his daughters. They had no interest in leaving Sodom. They loved that place. And when he left out of there, his own wife is turning around, looking behind her. Boy, she just loved Sodom. She couldn't leave that place. And he gets up there, and his daughters, they didn't love God. They were not just. They weren't righteous like the Bible tells us that Lot was. And they committed grievous sins and produced enemies for the nation of Israel for centuries. Still around, no doubt, today, these people they produced. In the book of Jude, in chapter number 1, he warns us about some people. He said in verse number 8 there, likewise also these filthy dreamers defile the flesh, despise dominion, and speak evil of dignitaries. He said that they are filthy dreamers. They just always kind of coming up with something that's more wicked than what was come up with before. He said that's the type of people you're dealing with. And that's what we've got in our society, a lot of filth. And you've got to be careful and not let that into your home. He says in Psalms 85:10 that mercy and truth are met together. Righteousness and peace have kissed each other. He said peace goes with righteousness, not unrighteousness. Peace goes with righteousness. It said in Isaiah 32:17, and the work of the righteous shall be peace, and the effect of righteousness, quietness, and assurance forever. Those things will go together. Now, here's a third thing for you. Here in Psalms 128, thinking about verse 3, still with the vine and the plants, is that you can't allow a free-for-all. Okay? In a free-for-all, you're not going to have a lot of peace. And I know that we've got people that are extroverted. They like to be out and about and doing things and talking. And then you have people that are more introverted. They like to stay home. Maybe they're more interested in reading a book than playing Monopoly. That's just differences in personality. But a free-for-all implies that there is a lack of discipline and order. Okay? When there's a vine growing by the house, you have to take care of it or that vine will be everywhere. Now, I personally have a vine. It's a clematis that's in my backyard. And there I have a fence there, and I put it by the fence on purpose. I wanted it to go up through that chain link fence and kind of decorate it. Chain link fence to me just isn't very pretty. And that clematis got in that. But you know what it did? It kept on spreading, and it kept on spreading, and there's a tree behind my chain link fence that it somehow got messed up in that thing. And there's some honeysuckle growing over there too, and it's not really my property. I hate having that honeysuckle bush over there. And when it tries to come through the chain link fence, I always cut it off so that it's not in my yard, but it's still over there on that side. And you know what happened? The vine got into that too. And I could trim that clematis back. I probably should, but it's taken up through that honeysuckle and into that tree, so that now, I mean, as spring comes on, that vine just starts coming alive, and you can see how big it is. You know what? If I wanted that thing to really look nice, I'd have to do some work to trim it back. You know what? That's what you got to do in your life sometimes. It seems like things will get out of control. That means you need to take some time and trim some things out of there. To have these plants, he said they're round about the table. That means that there's some order to how they're situated there. You can't have peace where there isn't order and isn't some discipline. Now I'm going to show you what it was said about a couple of parents. Look back in Genesis 18. In Genesis 18, God had something good to say to Abraham about the type of father he would be. Genesis chapter number 18. And this applies to churches too. You know, there are churches where it's run by the deacons, or it's run by the women's club, or it's run by Sunday school teachers, or it's run by the nursery. That's not good. Churches ought to be run by the pastor. Let me throw that in there. I believe that that's how it was established in the New Testament. He talks about obeying them to have the rule over you, so it kind of sounds like the preacher and the pastor of the church has some authority and is the one that God wants to lead the thing. Now, I believe that pastors are no different than any other Christian in the sense that they still sin. It's not that they are unquestionable. We don't believe in a Jim Jones type of follower, a character that people follow unquestioningly and it becomes a cult. We don't believe in that. But through the principles of God's Word, you ought to submit to the authority of the man of God. We believe that that's the case. And churches that are not run that way, they never are much for God. They usually get real liberal real fast because they won't tolerate a preacher who will preach against anything. A preacher that feels comfortable enough with his church that he can preach what God's told him to, that's a good man of God. I've talked to fellas up in his 70s now. He said when he took his first church and got preaching on things that, man, they didn't like it. They were telling him, you'll resign, you'll leave. He said, I'm not leaving. Middle of the night, they're showing up he lived in a trailer. He said they'd show up there trying to shoot at the house, killed his dogs, stuff like this going on. He said they were wanting him to leave. You know what? They didn't have any peace in that church, did they? They didn't want God, and they certainly didn't want a preacher who would tell them what was right. They weren't going to listen to him. Time went by, he left that church. I'd say he did the smart thing. That thing had Ichabod written all over it. In Genesis 18, look at what it says in verse number 19. He says, for I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he hath spoken of him. You know what? God said, I've chosen to have a relationship with this fellow Abraham, and I've made him a lot of promises. There's some things I know about him. He is going to command this household that I've blessed him with that he's got. Look over in Judges 13. Another example here is the man Samson. And when they found out they were going to have a baby, Mrs. Manoah and Manoah, in Judges chapter number 13, they had some questions for that angel. Judges 13 and verse number 12, it said over here, and Manoah said, now let thy words come to pass, how shall we order the child, and how shall we do unto him? There in Judges 13. You know what? He gets instructions from that angel about how he's going to be a Nazarite and the way that they are to take care and raise Samson and how he's going to be a deliverer. You know what? They are these two people. They give us example of having some order and some discipline. Here's some examples of a free-for-all, and if this describes your home, you might be lacking in some peace. Okay, number one, you ought to have times that you get up and times that you go to bed. You know, we have time when church starts. That's 10 o'clock. And we're going to have a service that starts at 11 o'clock. And I'm going to do my very best not to take Sunday school and go up to 11:05. You all expect me to stop, because that's what we should do. And we'd have a break time. The children will come out of their classes. People can use the restroom. You can greet one another and shake. You know what? We have some order here, some discipline. You know, people don't really care for a preacher that gets up and he just decides to go for 2.5 hours. Because there is an expectation that you're not going to do that. There is an expectation of what should happen. Here's the order and the discipline that we are accomplishing. I know we would say, well, we don't want to cut the man of God short, but there's still some expectations, just like there should be in a home. There should be times that people get up and times that people go to bed. I know people that don't have any of that. They get up whenever they feel like at 11 o'clock, noon, that's when they roll out of bed, and they'll stay up till 2 in the morning, and they come in for church on Sunday morning all bleary-eyed, and they're not going to be able to stay attention. They're not going to be with you on anything happening in that service. It's an undisciplined home. They don't have a lot of peace because of that. Something else. Here's things, if you got children, toys put away and not left out all over the place. You know what children do? They play with one toy for about 3 minutes, and now they're tired of that one, so they want to switch to a new one. And they play with that one for about 3 minutes, and then they switch to another. And you know what they don't do? They don't put this one away first before they go to this one. They just totally lose interest in this one and put it down and go grab another. And if you don't stay on top of that, you'll have toys all over your house. You're looking at a father. I know that is true. You have to tell your kids, hey, put that away. I've got Lizzie. She's 4. You want to tell Lizzie, hey, you just went to play with this and you left this out. Go put that away first. If I don't do that, she'll have everything out. But some people, they don't do that and everything's out. It's not easy to have a peaceful home when you come home from work and the whole living room is full of toys that you're trying to step over or walk around or kick in, you're underfoot. Putting your clothes, you have dirty clothes, don't you have a basket or something you put those in when it's laundry time? Some people don't do that. They literally have a pile in the living room, and some that are laying in the bathroom, and some that are laying around in the bedroom. And here's a good one. After they do laundry, what do you do with laundry after it's done? You take shirts and you put them on hangers and hang them in a closet. And you take things and you fold them and you put them in drawers. Some people don't do that. Did you know that? They wash the clothes and then they just lay them all out somewhere. Either they keep them down there in the laundry room or they're still in a basket. They just use them out of the basket. Wearing some wrinkled shirt. Why? Because they didn't put it away right. You know what? You say, well, that stuff doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal. It'll cost you some peace. That lack of discipline, not having any order, it'll cost you some peace in your home, having a free-for-all like that. Eating together at the table. This is something that's missing from American society these days. People just sitting down and having a meal together with their family. How many times have you gone to a restaurant and you just look around at the other people in the restaurant and it's like they're eating there by themselves because they're looking at their phone like this? Half of them text each other at the table. How crazy is that? They're sitting across from their wife or son or daughter or whatever, and they're texting each other. It's like they don't speak to each other, and they're worried about homeschoolers not being properly socialized. People will tell you that when you first start homeschooling your kids, like we did. Your kids might not be properly socialized. They won't know how to interact with people. Hey, I didn't give them a cell phone, and they're going great. A lot better than some other kids I've seen. Amen. You give them a cell phone, they will forget how to socialize with people. Something else that'll help is that everybody takes care of their dishes and cleans up after a meal. Or did you think that mom was your slave and that she does all that? I think that some people think that. They think that mom's in the home to do nothing but everybody's work. She washes everybody's clothes. She puts it all away. She washes all the dishes. She cooks all the meals. She's going to get up real early. She's going to stay up real late. She helps with the homework, and she helps with this. She does that, and then at some point, she goes to bed, and then she gets to do it all over again. Does that sound like a happy life to you? And people are like, well, yeah, that does sound pretty good. Now you're taking advantage of her. There are homes where the woman is taken advantage of. She's not going to be like verse 3 describes, a wife being a fruitful vine. If everybody always dumps everything on her, there should be some personal responsibility. You know what happens after my wife does some laundry? Here's a basket of clothes. This is yours. You guys are teenagers. You can fold your own stuff and put it away. It'll be good for you. One day you're going to have to wash it all yourself too. So let's go ahead and get ready for that. You know what happened when I was a young person? We didn't have what they call automatic dishwashers, that you put the dishes in there and you press a button and go sit in the living room. We had a divided sink. And you know what Dad believed in? He believed Mom had done enough work. He said, son, you and your brother and your sister are going to do the dishes. And, so there's really only room for 2, so you won't have to do it every night. It'll just be a rotation of the 3 of you. And you know what? That's not going to hurt kids. Amen. That's going to teach them to be productive. You know why a lot of people are unhappy? A lot of people are unhappy because they're not productive. When you have a life that's not produced anything, and you haven't done anything meaningful, it actually produces a depression in the heart of people. People want to feel valued. They want to feel like they've contributed somehow to people's lives and to society. When they don't have that feeling, they often become depressed. And a lot of young people, you see people doing all kinds of crazy stuff that are in their teens or in their early 20s. You say, why are they doing all that stuff? They're not very happy.
Amen.
You say, why are they acting that way? Why are they living that way? Why are they resorting to drugs or criminal type of activity, or just wanting to get a lot of tattoos and be some kind of live some sort of alternative lifestyle? I'll tell you why. They're not happy. They don't have peace down in their heart. That's what the trouble is. We also have to deal with this issue. Sometimes our kids, they just are rambunctious, running around into things, jumping on beds and jumping on furniture. Have you ever been to somebody's house and their furniture's all broke down? You know what happened. Kids have been jumping on that. And it's fun to jump on a bed. I did it. You probably did too. You know what you got to tell your kids when they're doing that? You got to tell them to stop. Some people just don't tell kids to stop. You know what happens? It's that way in a church environment. If a pastor won't get in control of some things, if there aren't some men in the church that say that don't need to go on around here, it will. You know, at our church, our pastor doesn't have to be the one that does that all the time. We've got an associate pastor there, and I've seen some boys hanging around by the back door acting like clowns, and him tell them, you boys stop that. Now, their dad should have done it. And it wasn't their dads, their moms should have done it. But I guess they were busy and talking to someone else and didn't notice that their kids were back by the back door acting like clowns. So I'm glad that the associate pastor took care of that problem. You need people that kind of take care of problems like that, because it'll get worse. If you don't take care of problems, they get worse. They'll be out in the parking lot, next thing you know, goofing that way, and then one will be in the street. And you wouldn't want a kid getting hit in the street. Things will always snowball. They get worse. You got to take care of those things. And here's another thing: you ought to teach them to use manners. I still believe in manners myself. Amen. Okay, you know, saying things like "thank you" and "please" and holding the door for each other and that kind of thing. And here's one I'll throw this in too that kind of bugs me. I was always taught when I was a boy that when you address an adult, you don't call them by their first name. Okay, I was taught that you address adults by their last name. That's Brother Smith, and that's you know, Mrs. Chancery, or whatever their last name is. That's what you address them as. You don't call them by their first name. And I have seen young people, I'm talking like 10 years old, that will talk to the preacher, the pastor of the church, and want to call him by his first name, or not even say brother. Now, you know, there's people that'll say Brother Amos to me, and that doesn't bother me a bit. There's some, if they're like 12 years old and they're coming up and saying, "Hey there, Amos, how are you doing?" And I'm like, it's not even Brother Amos, or, you know, Brother Neihaus is how I would have been taught to do it. And you know what you see sometimes in people like that in their homes? There is a real lack of discipline. It is a free-for-all, and then you'll see that there's a lot of trouble. They have problems in that home. But a lot of times they're not seeing what they need to work on to take care of some of those problems. Let me throw this one in here having to do with these plants and things that are around your table. They're in verse number 4. Verse number 3, they're around your table. And that is to be careful about friends. I'm a firm believer that the Lord established this thing about a family, and He wants us to be a close-knit unit. And when you have very close friends, they can start to have more influence than mom and dad on the children. And in a church environment, you can have friends outside here that begin to have more of an influence on you than your pastor and your brothers and sisters in Christ. You always need to be careful about friends if they start to exert too much of an influence. Okay? I don't want my children to be influenced by bad friends. You say, how do you know they'll be bad? Because usually it goes that way. Usually you raise good kids or you have a good church, usually the outside friends are going to be a detriment. They're not going to be a help. You all know about Jonadab, I'm sure. David had a son, Amnon, and he got to lusting after his sister, and he thought it very hard for him to do anything. He wasn't going to do anything. He had having some evil thoughts there, but he wasn't planning on doing anything. But he had a friend. He had a friend named Jonadab who gave him all the details and a wicked plan for how he could work it out and get what he wanted. And you know what? That's how people are. That's how friends are. You have to be careful about friends. They'll lead you down the wrong path. A fifth thing, I'll be obvious, you can't have peace if you allow a bunch of fussing and fighting. A home where there's fussing and fighting and yelling at each other, cursing, you say, oh, surely that wouldn't go on in a Christian home. I don't know about that. Okay, I don't know about that. There's a lot of stuff that will go on. You'd be surprised in Christians' lives. Okay? And if you have fussing and fighting going on, you won't have peace that way. That should be pretty obvious. You know, that extends to something like this, teasing and tormenting and picking on each other too. All right? Kids don't always punch each other with their fists, but they're just mean to each other. You know, church members are just mean to each other sometimes. There will be somebody that every time you go to talk to them, they just have to make some dig. They have to say something rude to you. And you know what? It's hard to be around somebody like that, but that stuff, it'll take away the peace. You won't have a lot of peace when you're not behaving the way that you should towards one another, having a bunch of fussing and feuding and trouble. Jacob and Esau, they were that way. Did that sound like a happy home? Isaac and Rebekah, boy, they were sitting down and, right before they go to bed and say, boy, we just have like the happiest family. They didn't act that way. I have two sons that don't get along all the time. And another thing I've got to hear is about playing favorites. They played favorites too. I got my favorite, that's Jacob. And Isaac's like, well, I've got my favorite, and that's Esau. Hey, if you have favorites, you're going to have problems. Yeah. You know what? This extends into a church environment. You start to have like, well, Brother Eugene, I just really like him. I go to his house on Monday nights, and he comes to my house on Friday nights. We hang out through the week. And at church, we just I sit behind him, or he sits in front of me. And if we're going to sing a special together, me and Brother Eugene, we always sing it. We won't sing with anybody else. We just sing just him and I because we're best friends. You know what happens? That actually causes division and problems by showing such a strong favoritism and partiality. That takes away peace. Joseph, what happened with his father? Oh, Jacob, boy, I'll make him this special coat, many colors. What happened? All his other brothers, they envied him. They didn't like him. They despised him for that. You have to be careful about showing favoritism or you won't have peace. Another thing is about foul mouths. I think about like cursing. That would obviously be a foul mouth. But what about lying and complaining? Children are just going to lie. It's a shock, isn't it? And they're also going to complain. Have you ever taken a long trip? What's the first thing they ask when you've been on the road about 25 minutes? They ask, are we there yet? And then, no, we're not there yet. We just started this trip. I remember going up to Pennsylvania to preach once. It was like 6.5 hours. And I think that everybody in the car was starting to say, are we there yet? By the time we got there, I'd never been to Pennsylvania. And when you start driving that I-70 to the far east side of Ohio, it starts to get like there's not a whole lot here. And you get to West Virginia for all of about 10 minutes, and you drive through that little stretch there. And then you make it to Pennsylvania. So you're like, we're almost there, right? And this is like Altoona is where we're going. And it's like, no, you're not almost there yet. We got a lot left. You know what? Complaining will sap the peace out of your home. You're not going to have a peaceful church, a peaceful life. There's people I work with that are very unhappy. You say, why? Because they're always upset. It's like there's nothing that can happen at work that makes them happy. It's just one complaint after another. They'll complain about this, and then they move on and complain about that. They'll fix this problem. There's another problem that they're complaining about. You're not going to be happy being full of complaints. It reminds me of the children of Israel out there in the wilderness. I didn't seem like a happy bunch of people. They got out of Egypt. You'd think that'd make you pretty happy. They spent 40 years murmuring and complaining. That was an unhappy group of people. You can't allow a bunch of foolishness. Now, let me say that children are foolish by nature, and he gives us some verses there in the book of Proverbs on how to drive foolishness out of a child. Children do these things. They'll be loud. There'll be like this really loud talking. They have no inside voice usually, some children. Some children like to make obnoxious noises, particularly boys. Okay, I don't know if you're aware of this. They like to be silly and make obnoxious noises that they think are funny, that the rest of us think they are retarded, and we don't know why their parents don't do something about that. They'll pull stupid stunts. We were all children before. Didn't you ever pull any stupid stunts? I remember thinking that this would be really funny. We were at my grandparents' house. We were spending the night, and my mom and dad weren't there. And that's always a good time to try something out, isn't it? And my brother was fixing to take his seat at the dinner table, and I was standing next to him, and I grabbed his chair from behind and jerked it out just as he was going down. And it worked just the way I hoped it would. He went completely down to the floor, landing on his rear end. I mean, I got him all the way. And my grandmother, she came about that close to whip me. She never did whip me, but she said she really wanted to that time. She really reprimanded me, though, and I was scared of her. I thought she was going to whip me. I remember another time sitting in the mall, and we had already been misbehaving, and Dad said, you don't get to go in the store. You're going to sit on this bench in the mall while me and your mother go into the store. They go into the store that they're wanting to look at something there, and we're sitting on the bench in the mall. And I got my brother on this side, and I got my sister on this side. I was the oldest one, so usually the oldest one can be counted on for things like this. And I put my arm around them, rubbing on their shoulders and the back of their necks, and then I grabbed them by the back of their heads and clunk. I put their heads together just like that. Just a stupid stunt. The same time that Dad and Mom were walking out of the store. You're talking about caught red-handed. And so that I did get a good spanking for that one. You know what? Kids are liable to do things like that, and you're not going to have much peace in your home if you don't take that in hand. You know what? Unfortunately, even as Christians, we're liable to pull some stupid stunts on God. You know what we need? We need the Lord to correct those things in our life. You're not going to have peace if you do that. Let me mention two other things we need to be done. One is you're going to have some forgiveness. Sometimes people have a lack of forgiveness in the home. You know, not everybody's going to Dad's not always going to do right. Mom's not always going to do right. Certainly the children are always going to do right. We need to extend some forgiveness to one another. And that works in a church environment too. You don't have peace in a church where there isn't forgiveness shown to one another, because we're all sinners saved by the grace of God. And you know what we're bound to do? We're bound to hurt one another from time to time and do some things that we shouldn't do. And then another thing is don't be fickle. You got to be a person who's not hard to please. It says this about David in 1 Chronicles 16:43, that he returned to bless his house. Some people are a blessing to their house, but some people are hard to please. I think about it. I heard a story of a fellow, maybe you all know him, Brother Brian Donovan. He's the preacher down there in Pensacola, Florida, after Brother Ruffman died. I believe he's the pastor of that church and everything now. And he tells a story when he was a boy. He grew up in a lost family, but they were principled people. They raised him to have some character. He said he was playing basketball, but his father was the type that was never pleased. He would score, and after the game, his father would always tell him what he did wrong. How you had a defensive lapse, and that guy scored because you weren't paying attention. You didn't try your hardest. And yeah, you did this, but you missed some free throws. If you'd worked more on those free throws, you'd have made those shots. And I believe that he tells a story that there was a state championship, high school game or whatever, and that I believe he hit the winning shot in that game. And afterwards, he thought, surely Dad will be happy. Tell me, good job, that you did it, or whatever. His dad did not compliment him, had no kind words to say to him, just like, well, that's what you should have done. And he said that after that game, it was basically his decision. He said he never played basketball again. He just had it because of the way that his dad made him feel the whole time he did that. You can't have peace in a home where there's no affirmation, a big word that says you show people you appreciate them, that you love them, that you care about them. If you don't say those kind of things and send that message to one another, you come off like, man, there's nothing you can do to please this person. And that's not how we ought to be. In Ephesians 6 and Colossians 3, it talks about not frustrating your children. It talks about not provoking them to wrath. And I think that's what that father did to Brother Donovan when he was telling that story. That's what I got for you this morning. So let's all stand. Let's have a word of prayer, and we'll be dismissed from the Sunday school class. All right. Dear God, we thank you, Lord, for the opportunity to be in your house. Father, we thank you, Lord, for your word. And then, Father, you can teach us some things, just real practical things that, Lord, we can apply in our lives. And, Lord, would make us better Christians, Lord. Hopefully bring us closer in tune with your will. Father, we ask that you bless this service to follow. And, God, if there be a lost sinner that come in today, that, Lord, you speak to their heart, prick them about their sinful condition. And, Lord, show them that you can wipe away their sins through the flow from Calvary, God. Lord, I pray that you would encourage the saints and give them what they need. In Jesus' name, amen.